collaborated on or edited or changed at will.
A check tablecloth laid in an isolated clearing. A bottle of red wine, 2 glasses, cheese, and bread. Walking the sound of water, weight-capped sound of water, or a bottle of Cabernet Sauvignon set on a wooden tablecloth, cold water, crystal goblets unexpectedly at midnight, purple lupine on the hillside, beside the Dempsey dumpster in town, walking down to the water where the homeless gathered, a flower dress, unexpected woodland events, weight-capped spring water in winter, a bottle of Cabernet Sauvignon set on a linen tablecloth, cold water, a flower dress, the smell of hops and honey, the smell of green grass, outflow of a stone by the river, the smell of front door, grass, under the eaves of the river, the cabin where we were working, the sound of water, white-capped mountains, purple lupine on the hillside, making love.
Electronic literature is forms of literature that make use of the computer or the network context to achieve effects that wouldn't be possible in print.
My birth takes place more than once in the plea of a bygone monster, from a muddy hole by corpse light, under the needle and under the pen. Or it took place not at all. But if I hope to tell a good story, I must leapfrog out of the muddle of my several births, to the day I parted for the last time with the author of my being and set out to write my own destiny.
So it might start with smell when that's possible in the future. At present it starts with image very dominantly and proceeds through text to sound in kind of a hierarchy, which I very much dislike. But I think the opportunities within that for interaction between those different senses and different means of generating stuff are just fantastic, particularly when we bring similar algorithms to bear on all of them. And we see their interactions both at the code, the sonic, the visual, and the meaning level.
Electronic literature is the exploration of concepts beyond the ordinary using electronic means. And in traditional vision-based media, you have moving pictures, you have more traditional genres such as, printed text where things don't move around, but electronic literature involves exploring how we take concepts, how we perceive the world and ourselves, and trying to portray that using computation, using the specific processes that are unique to computers.
There are 2 main literary parents for me, for the fiction, and one of them is Thomas Pynchon, and Gravity's Rainbow, which is a novel which contains within it music hall numbers, popular songs, equation. There are no visible artworks, but there is a tremendous reference to the language of art and film and music and theater, and that was a mental model for me, that the novel did not have to proceed in a linear fashion using only narrative.
Electronic literature for me is literature that takes advantage of the capacity of new media to alter the state of writing.
It's literature that engages its digitality.
I remember sitting in my office in Jackson, Michigan, in community college, and thinking, damn, I'm going to have to teach people how to read this thing.
Prepared, sugar is not a volume.
Traversal is a process by which a user, performer, author performs a work of electronic literature on the original hardware and with the original software for which the work was produced. It's intended to capture the cultural context of a work, and that includes everything from sounds to glitches to the look and feel of the interface to the way we interact with the keyboard and those kinds of physical material processes.
Structure first.
Yes.
We
yes,
have to
yes.
structure
equals
first,
meaning.
because you have to understand
where your words are going to go.
Yes.
You can't just throw your words on a page. Two works that were made in 1997. And this is for purposes of archiving and history, so I brought some material. Three parts of this prologue. The first is what I said about it in 1997 when it was made. Then there's a section called How I Came to Write True North, which I wrote in 2007. And then I have a very brief remark that I made about it at MLA in 2019, just this past January. So in 6 ways that I described this publication at the time of its hypertext publication. 1, in 1997, there are 3 forms of True North: a print book. Is this the camera? Great.
You can do either that screen or up to the face cam in front of you.
Ah. Okay, the print book, the hypertext.
I want to flip them around.
Oh, yeah. That would be a very good idea. All right. The print book, the hypertext, and then there's a web poem, which we'll read later. 2. As Muriel Rukeyser in US 1 used material not seen before in poetry, stock market quotes, doctor's reports, legal testimony, I assembled voices rarely heard in poems, those of science and math in conversation with history and myth from the Ice Age to the present, restaking Rukeyser's implicit claim that the fullest range of texts is required to understand and combat injustice. The hypertext form allows not only for a full range, but for a constantly renewed structure of proximity by which these voices can interrogate and answer each other. 3. True North allows voices to speak to each other across vast gaps. The old woman, a famous folkloric figure, is a major focus. She has many incarnations throughout the work: Mother Goose, Witch of Endor, the Irish-Scottish Hag of Bear, and Ice Age Timekeeper, among others. She speaks to Newton, to scientists who developed the atomic bomb, to abolitionists, genetic engineers, in the 19th century poetic and scientific giants, Emily Dickinson and Willard Gibbs. 4. True North explores the pressure language practice puts on women's bodies. The hand-drawn story space map of the Mother Lost World section of the hypertext suggests a breast or cornucopia basket or part of the DNA spiral, repeating the shape of the image given to the overall True North map 1 logical level up, and in turn repeated 1 logical level down as the profile or contour of many of the poems. True North interrogates the meaning of this ever-returning form, which speaks before any words are spoken. 5. True North rings the changes on 2 image/themes. The first of these is embeddedness or nestedness. In True North, embeddedness appears on a continuum from the most embodied example, the pregnant bodies of women who are trying to speak, to the most abstract example, the numbers as we know them on the number line. In between, slaves in the hold of the Amistad, the flight crew of the Challenger, star map patterns on the walls of Ice Age caves, poems sewn up in Dickinson's Hope Chest, and fractal patterns. The second image theme is an American heritage of formal structuring devices that are at once abstract and graphical, a heritage equally of American science and American poetry. True North focuses on 2 contemporaries from the Connecticut Valley, Willard Gibbs, the country's first mathematical physicist, and the poet Emily Dickinson, because they are both exemplary language makers, and their language has given us new ways to think. Gibbs, in the 19th century,
devised visualizing methods which redefined the meaning of space. Instead of being a static Cartesian grid, his phase space represented every possible lifeline of any system, any number of coexisting systems. The very shapes of graphs and models yielded truths about energetics of the system. Dickinson refused to title more than 1,700 poems and evolved singular methods of both production and punctuation. One radical innovation was to place a superscript cross, as we would place a footnote marker, to indicate words or places where she wished the reader to consider a range of choices. The choices she wanted to present were inscribed across the bottom of her page. These cross or crossroads markers are not signs of preliminary indecision. They are carefully copied on pages that are carefully sewn together, endorsements of multiple meaning. Then there's I named four effects that are native to the hypertextual form that I also used as rhetorical strategies. Prospective consequence in time capsule contents, retrospective reframing on first looking into Deringer's The Alphabet, direct address across an unbridgeable discursive gap, who counts counts, and recovery of a disembodied, distant voice, a history of bearing Greek gifts. So that was what I wrote in 1997. In 2007, I wrote How I Came to Write True North. In the 1980s, I began looking for a woman's language, which led eventually to a True North poem on first looking into Deringer's The Alphabet, a key to the history of mankind, which is an actual book. But the real beginning of that poem, that book, that quest, was an earlier book, The Red Virgin, a poem of Simone Weil, focused on a woman who actively claimed and managed her own life and language. True North grew out of The Red Virgin because what was left unspoken in that book was Simone's ethical concern for science and mathematics. She was a French philosopher and mystic whose life is a compound of complications, a Jew who became a Catholic mystic without joining that church, a philosopher who was also a factory worker, an agricultural laborer and labor organizer, a pacifist who worked for the resistance and for de Gaulle's Free French government. Though a world-class philosopher, the complete critical edition of her work in French is still not out, some 64 years after her death. Why? One reason is that running from Hitler, her papers and letters and notebooks were left all over Europe. A second reason, she was an activist and didn't spend the war writing in America as so many European intellectuals did. I think the deepest reason is that she defeats all the categories we have inherited. She defied the categories she belonged to. She never signed a petition that she didn't write herself. Facing a woman who was out of print, never fully in print, untranslated to a great extent, and largely knowable only through people who had very partisan positions to take about her, I became interested in how to structure this situation, not unique to her. I wanted to come to her by means of her life, her thought, commentary about her, and her historical situation. So I wrote a book of poems with an index-like table of contents, where you can start at any poem. Your experience is very different if you start out with a poem in the voice of a critic, or in her voice, or an account of an incident in her life, or if you start with her mother's letters. The Red Virgin was chosen for a publication prize by Liesl Muller, who I discovered later is nearly blind. It seems her husband read to her all of the candidate manuscripts. I had not consciously designed this book as an oral text, but learning about that selection process made me think a lot about oral text and about the role Mother Goose played in my life. The Red Virgin isn't hypertext, but it's print reaching toward hypertext. True North reaches even further toward hypertext, far enough that it seemed to want to be a hypertext, even when it was still in manuscript, which is what it was when I attended Kate Hales's electronic literature seminar in 1995. I heard about this seminar because I regularly attended the Society for Literature and Science, which Kate had a huge role in founding. Though the NEH seminars are generally for academics, I applied as an independent scholar and wound up being the only poet and the only representative from a public arts center. When I entered the seminar, I had some grasp of the issues involved in automating a library, but I had worked as a writer exclusively on a PC within Word 5. In that seminar, I was introduced to the nascent web, to MUDs, to Moos, to Apple, to StorySpace Beta, and a range of other software. It was overwhelming. Story Space for Windows Beta turned out to be the most overwhelming of all. I was reminded of this reading Bill Bly's account in a recent issue of EBR of how in 1997, preparing We Descend for Eastgate, he discovered he had lost 500 links. There was a flaw in the software that lost all links every 11th save. But I thought it was my fault, and my response to losing all my links was to save continuously, which of course exacerbated the problem. The result was a need to write and rewrite the hypertext without error, and as a result, I began a long career with repetitive stress injuries in my hands and arms. I visualized the independent parts of the True North poem, which is a poem within True North, used to divide the book section as spinning tops, energetic bridges between the various language sorts. I wanted all parts of the book and of the True North poem set spinning so one could position oneself anywhere amongst them and cross energetic bridges. As Dene Larsa and others have found, the full flexibility of Story Space wasn't necessarily intended or supported as time went on, so features would disappear with each software release. Story Space is not oriented to the visual. While I like the fact that links are not immediately seen via underlines, you have to invoke the control key, thus allowing a smooth read-through of the poem surface. I invested a lot of time into drawing and coloring my own maps. Dene Larsa helped me do that at Margie Loserbrink's house, where we had gathered to talk about what kind of hypertext tools writers really need. Margie was working with Toolbook at the time. Diane Greco, my editor at Eastgate, also helped a lot. One of the great difficulties when it came to publishing the hypertext is that only then was I told I needed a Mac and PC version. Yet the two versions of Story Space had completely different capabilities, and I had no ready access to a Mac. Nonetheless, with Diane's help, it got made, and as a result, there are true True North hypertexts. I had to rewrite the manual for each of them as the basic instruction set wasn't correct with regard to my poem. In the end, I preferred some aspects of the Mac version and some of the PC. In my essay in Eduardo Katz's media poetry book, I summed the situation up as follows. In 1995, I translated my book-length poem True North, featuring language revolutionaries Emily Dickinson and Willard Gibbs, to a digital poem created with Story Space software. The True North themes of navigation and embeddedness moved from being print concepts refracted in language to being the steering mechanism and constitutive structure of a hypertext. For this textually driven work about navigation, I designed the two most important orienting elements to be visual. The first of these is a set of mouse-drawn Story Space maps, emblematic shapes with their legends of node names. As site maps and as pattern poems, they give a very fair idea or sampling of True North. They provide a mode of understanding that may supplement or substitute for following links and reading texts. Such a displacement of text by image that also functions recursively as a guide to text is itself a distinct mode of oscillation, one which coexists with the familiar reference oscillation between a map and what it maps. The second orienting device was the coloring of a few words on each page. Since Story Space does not use color to signify text links, instead permitting the reader to press a key to reveal boxes around link words, each color operates visually to suggest a connection between similarly colored words. Each color is an embedded link, but one traceable only by human memory, not by software. Finally, in 2019, I said, this is what I said about True North. Print True North takes place across 5 sections. I always envisioned these as streamers swirling around a maypole or axis made of 5 direction finder poems that explain how to find True North using only your body and sticks and string and time. In print, all I could do was insert these poems between the major sections, so I was eager to take up the promise of Story Space in 1995. However, even today, I couldn't make that vision work. It calls for augmented or virtual reality as well as fonts designed for a 3D reading, such as Eduardo Katz's hologram fonts or Scott Kim's calligraphic inversions. Each word would need to be separately designed, and then one has to learn to read it in 3D. So now I will actually, what I did was I went back to look at presentation scripts that I had done in the first few years, from 97 to about 2000. And what we had done, we used this tool book to make an introductory presentation before I went to True North. So this is what we have here. And this shows you the top level map of True North, the hand-drawn one. And this is the Northern Lights, which is on the cover of the True North folder. These are two of the other hand-drawn maps. This one is the Mother Lost World, and this one is There Was an Old Woman. Exploring how embodiment gets translated into different kinds of language, True North focuses on the idea of pregnancy, one life contained inside another. And the containment idea is close to what's called embedding or self-similarity or subsethood in other contexts, which is part of what made the poems suitable to hypertext. So the True North book is a cover featuring an image by Joseph Cornell called Constellation. And both of the covers suggest a kind of writing on uncharted space. And here you see a page from the True North book, which is copied from the print reference book. Actually, this is how it looks in the book. And that image could not go into True North hypertext because you can't put images in story space. And I've scribbled all over this page. That is to say, I've annotated it. And the act of annotating, connecting differently, making new paths, rewriting charted space is basic both to poetry and to hypertext. Now this is the numbers section, numbers nesting in numbers nesting in number. That's their map. And this map, you can't quite see all of it here, is language is a cast of the human mind. And this is the Blue Planet Blues map, the fifth section. And True North takes place on this beleaguered blue planet whose people put their faith in science. They have largely forgotten the old woman. Oh, wait a second. Holly wants to see this one. This is a kind of a summary image. This is the cover of the book. This is the blue planet. Here's the upper level True North map. Here's a bit of some of the other maps. And this is, you see that some of the poems have a distinct contour themselves. Dene contour, there's a snowman contour that's different. And a lot of the poems have a shape that starts out like this and goes down like this, like a cornucopial or breast type of thing. Okay, so now we're going to. This is what story space True North actually looks like. The Linearity world. This is an acronym I made up. Level interaction, lattice dislocation. That is what's happening in the world and in the hypertext. So if you're not familiar with story space, if you choose navigate and then locate writing space, you'll get a list of all the nodes or lexia in the hypertext. Each of these spaces has a name, and the text embedded in them has a different name. The title of the text in them is the title that it had in the book, and a book page is not the same as a hypertext lexia, so they have different names. So the simplest way to read True North is to just keep hitting the Enter key. You will notice that some of the words are colored. Those are not clickable links. Each color operates visually to suggest a connection between similarly colored words. If you hold down the Control key, you'll see the clickable, you'll see the linked words or phrases. So if I choose need not tell, it takes me to a lexia called cooing. The links button will let me see all the links from this poem. In this case, there's 8 of them. Sometimes there's only one. So I'm going to go back. And if I proceed along, now I'm in the Mother Lost World section, and this is that poem. I'm first looking into Derringer's The Alphabet. This is a poem about ancient languages, those languages which were among the first to be written down, and the graphic messages they carry long before they intend to say anything. For instance, in the pictographs that underlie cuneiform, there is only one sign for woman, pudendum. This is a very long poem. That situation is not entirely ancient. At least as of 1999, if you asked for women with any internet search engine, 90% of the hits are porn sites. So when I click in the box, I'm usually taken to a different section of the hypertext. If I choose a woman's form, I have a choice of 2 places to go. But I can also travel by using maps. Let's just hope this works. Okay, so this is what happens when you're trying to read story space. You have to see the hand-drawn maps because it's not their maps. You have to resize the thing. And the orange indicates that's the window that you're at. You're at the alphabet, poem called Alphabet, or called Derringer's The Alphabet. And this map, made of so-called loopy links, is a great improvement on grid-style maps because it can be shaped into something graphically suggestive. Of course, I would really like maps that rotate in 3 dimensions. To me, the interorientation of the poems is as much a memory molecule as any protein. And I would love maps that fold like hemoglobin or DNA with a "you are here" marker. So here are other loopy link maps. Let's see if we can find Archimedes. So this Archimedes is in the Blue Planet Blues map. And if I go to A Loner's Legacy, you will see this is Language as a Cast of the Human Mind map. There's these 2, you can't really see it so well, right? And it's worse if you make it bigger. I mean, if you make it bigger, if you need to go into the poems and see the detail, but this is why we had to make an introductory presentation so you could get a better idea of the labs. And then if we do, all right, let's, first place, we can begin to cancel out some of these. But anyway, let's do another one, which is Mirror will take you to the numbers, nesting in numbers, and this is the, you can sort of see, this is the overall map for the numbers section. And if I go to annotated Mother Goose, you will see this is the sort of a feather, which is what the old woman travels on, in the air wafting around. So now let's look at the, I'm going to look by contrast at the character of the maps. And this is what story space gives you for that poem. And if I go up, if I use this little triangle to go up, I get to there was an old woman. Since we're at this, there was an old woman thing, right? And if I go up all the way again, it looks like this. So every one of those maps is like this stupid column, what I consider to be a non-lovely column, which is why I felt I had to make different kind of maps. But it just didn't quite fit within the software so well to make it easy to see them. So I'm going to go to this poem, Gyroscopes. Now I think we'll just close out some of these windows, and especially you, and go up here. Okay. So this is a poem in the book. It's called Guidance, and sometimes it's very helpful to have this thing. It tells you gyroscopes because it doesn't lets you know maybe more specifically what you're in for. And if we choose the link, all we know, which we have to get moved down a little bit to do. Yes, if I choose the link, all we know, yeah, I'm taking to the lexia called Vectors and the poem called Striving All My Life. And in this poem, James Clerk Maxwell, father of the electronic age, discovers with delight the vector spaces and notation invented by Willard Gibbs, America's first mathematical physicist. Gibbs, well, we've talked about that. So as Maxwell says, I have been striving all my life to be free of the yoke of Cartesian coordinates. I found, he really did. I found such an instrument. Well, anyway, finally he finds it in Gibbs. And then if I choose Introduce Knowledge as a link, we're taken to a poem. It's called, the lexia is called Dream. And it came from a memoir, a personal view of science and its history by the chemist who prepared the fissionable material for the Hiroshima and Nagasaki bombs. It's a really interesting poem to see how he gets seduced into doing this. But anyway, I read it. I still have vivid sensual memories of that time. To this day, a frequent dream is of wandering through complex assemblies of industrial buildings full of such machines in search of something I never find. And if we go in search of something, we finally come to the old woman. So who in the book, who's who, a kind of whoing for her in the hypertext, and I'll actually read this poem. Who then sweeps them loose, who diffuses broken shining bits, the far-flung force washed to foam on a rock face, succulence, and whelks alive inside its raising spray, who slings the broth aslide in cups of ocean swell, whose bolt of lace, a great spill of it blowing in the window with her pins, patterns the firmament, patterns the phosphorescent body of an eel making slip knots in the dark sea, patterns fireflies sailing through grass at the edge of a wood, lit and unlit at twilight, giving body to the air, or to some brimming a being whose who. And if I choose body to the air, I'm taken to pregnancy poem. Embryos is the lexia. Technological embryos do occur in True North, in the poem Lodged in a Nursery Glass, but this poem is in the voice of a young woman trying to make sense of her pregnant body, a body transformed by embedding. She's trying to use the language of science. And if I choose the link Closed Pocket, it'll take me to a poem, American Artificers, which I'll also read. Gibbs making found, what lies hidden, so deeply nested is it within, so down deeply pocketed, miles from the icy, calm, notational surface, making a line, a lure, one symbol, one elliptical expression, holding echo upon echo, decoding to a catalog, an infinite acceptance. Detonation as almost welcome and always implicit in the mind, like the cloud low and going to snow in Connecticut. Great still pool, demoralized desire that waits for snow, as if the snow were winged. Noah Webster was a contemporary of Gibbs and Dickinson in the Connecticut Valley, and demoralize is the one word he invented of all the words he put in his dictionary. And we learn that in one of the other poems. So finally, closing this loop, if I choose a winged, I'm taken to Above the Steeple, which is about a weather vane, and another poem about guidance. In this valley, where Gibbs and Dickinson lived and worked alone, deeply reclusive as both were, never marrying, living and dying in the houses they were born in. So this is a kind of loop coming full circle by using text loop, a kind of loop about guidance, by using text words to click on that we came around this way. Now there's two other kinds, and another kind of link is the whole True North series itself. So I'm gonna, if I go there, so you'll see these poems have a kind of axis spinning top looking shape to them. And if I go to the links thing, I can go from one to the next, or indeed, yeah. So this one is Our Home, the Earth, and then I read the third one to you. The third one is It's Hard. So to find True North with this sticks and string method, you have to figure out how, you have to get the shadow is nothing at noon if you have this thing, your little stick. It's hard. The noontime shadow changes length very slowly. The noontime shadow is only one length. It's length at noon. The noontime shadow, my watch is usually off anyway. It's hard. I mean, it's difficult, what with the little ridges in the dust, the cellophane silvery glare on the sand, trying to track it over those few moments. It was getting shorter. That much was clear. That part was easy. And then it dawns on you, or dusks, getting longer again. Yes, indubitably. But that zone, that zero, that anxiety of getting it just so at its very consensual shortest, things are changing here now so minutely with such delicacy, north and noon, and this sort of a wonderful vertical stick. Anyway, so that you can go, you can go to True North 4, which is a stratagem for doing it better than trying to judge when the shadow is exactly zero. And then you can go, and then True North 5. It's easy. At the South Pole, there every direction is true north. Direction there itself, the point, turning and moving, or the place where you look if you still stand waiting, though you forget all the steps. Forget. Remember, every, and so easy at the nadir. So then there's a third kind of link, a third kind of loop, which is the number series. And it's created by the graphic, this underneath this line. This is a poem that looks like a snowman, which is a little, can you see his scarf? Can you see the snowman? They contour, I mean. So it starts with 0, and then we can hit enter, actually, if we used to get. So then natural numbers, we add these parentheses. These are what are called counting numbers, 1, 2, 3, and so forth. When you go to mirror, you've added the negative numbers. When you go to rational numbers, you've added the fractions. This is how you represent that. And this embedded. Real numbers, you get repeating fractions. And imaginary numbers, now you're adding a whole new axis for the number line. And each of the previous types is embedded within it. So the imaginary is the largest around the reals, around the rationals, around the integers, around the natural numbers. And so if I choose the link star at the skin, it takes me to the Lexia fractality, or Presto, how the universe is made. 1/20th century thinking tool, which affects us all in compression and antennas and so forth. It was only 22 years old. That's in 1997. It was only 22 years old. I mean fractal geometry. Fractals are patterns that organize reality so it stays identifiable no matter how deeply you go inside it or how far away you observe it from. A simple example is of the head of a cauliflower, where each floret repeats the shape of the overall head. Presto, how the universe is made, takes on a bigger or biggest example, One of the issues with electronic literature is how to use multimedia, what portion belongs to words, what to visuals, what to sound. Stuart Dixon pushes for the visual in his Leonardo article, True 3D Computer Modeling. He says that if a two-dimensional picture is worth 1,000 words, then a three-dimensional is worth 31,600,000 some words. This poem has 170 words, including the title. I think it does a good job of compression. If I, all right, so we go down, and if I choose the link or deeper, or brought to the end, or To Be Here, Lexia, which contains the poem To Be Here as Stone Is. This is a pivot of the hypertext and also the last poem in the print book. And you can see that it is actually very heavily linked, both heavily colored and heavily linked. Okay, now I'm going to swap computers. I'm finished with True North here. And we'll go over to the web project. This is as bright as it can be. It used to be a little brighter now. Okay. This is To Be Here as Stone Is as a web project done in collaboration with MD Coverly, who's Margie Luzabrink. And it's got these Java applets, which are lovely but temperamental. And I'm going to see how far we get with it. It's not showing properly on every screen, but it's as proper as we've been able to manage. This first, you can navigate by clicking. Oh, it would be good if I used this one. You can navigate by clicking in various places, but also by these little stones over here. Now this is one of the things that's not supposed to go across the screen like that. It's supposed to be in a ribbon down the screen like it was before. And this, let's see what this takes us to. This is not supposed to do that either, that you have it twice the same way, but this takes you to actually the most complex and beautiful of the applets, which I'm going to let play for a while. You'd think it ends, but then it doesn't. It keeps going in a kind of lovely way, kind of like a rebirth of the universe or something. Anyway, we liked it. Now, as I think, yes, in the case of the applet things, all of them seem to go. And so this is another one where the ribbon isn't quite right. And then here's another, what we call sort of a game of life or applet. And this goes to, let's see what Artisans goes to. Oh, back there we are again. Let's see what Ceiling Glaze takes us to. So all the words of the To Be Here as Stone Is poem are running down that ribbon, and then just certain parts of it are brought forth to this side. And so I don't want to fool around with this too much longer because it's not taking me to the rest. I want to show you the rest of the applet pages, which I'm going to have to manually do. This is the fire one. And this is the drops of water. And this is what we thought of as sea light. And And this is the snow, where it isn't perfectly meshed with its background. But anyway, so so that's that. So I guess now I join you, right? Okay.
Welcome. Yeah, welcome to the Q&A. And so the way we work the Q&A is that the folks in the audience here can pose questions directly to Stephanie. But we also have 13 people online, some of which are in this room. Some of you are on both here and online. But we have several folks online that might want to ask a question. And when they do, I will pose that to Stephanie. She'll respond to you and you can hear her. So that's good. And we have already people thanking you. So Troy Rowden, who is a student, graduate student in the PhD program and master's program at Washington State Pullman, is taking ELIT, and and interested in your work. And Monica, of course, Monica Gorska-Osolcinka is here, and she visited my lab to study your work. So Monica says hi and thank you.
Hi, Monica.
Yeah. So she says, and you can look right at the camera and say.
Okay. Hi, Monica.
Richard Snyder's also thanking you. He's another graduate student taking that class. Let's open up questions. We have several folks here in the lab with us, the Move Lab, and folks online. So Jules is first to ask a question.
Okay.
So Jules, she says, I love the imagery. How do you think the incorporation of 3D holograms would impact an ELIT piece? I'm thinking of incorporating it in my final project in Dene's class.
So this is not to Jules, I know. This is a different
No, this is a different Jules. This is Jules the Gatherer, and she's a graduate student, PhD student in my graduate course in ELIT.
Well, I think one of the things she might want to look at is the documentation for the Techno Poetry Festival, where we actually had Eduardo Katz's hologram poetry. Now I mounted that in 2002 at Georgia Tech, and we brought his holograms to Atlanta from Chicago and put them up in the break room. That's the only room we could make dark enough in this little space. But to see a hologram, to see something three-dimensional is just entirely different than you think. I mean, you expect to read from a few perspectives. You go down a highway or you're in a big city and you get different angles that you can see. But to have actual three-dimensional hologram, it's wonderful, but it's really different. And you will need to train people. You'll need to somehow train people to read them, or you'll need to design them in such a way that there's an easy transition from the reading they know to the reading you want them to know. And I think a lot of writing for new media has been about that. Is like, for good and for bad, designing interfaces and designing ways of getting people to think of things that they weren't before, though sometimes it gets conventionalized really fast and, then creativity kind of goes away. But insofar as you can be designing them and redesigning them and teaching people new things, both muscularly and cognitively, I think it's a wonderful thing, and go for it.
Yeah, it's going to be a little hard to learn that real fast in the next couple of weeks. So, Jules, you might want to think about that for next year. But, yeah, it's a great idea. And she asked who is a poet again. So, Jules, next week your assignment is to read Eduardo Katz. And so she just mentioned him. He's also the author of Media Poetry, who does a really great job looking at the history of media poetry.
And make available to him that transcript of what he said.
I will,
at the conference.
Yeah, I appreciate that, because she just also Stephanie donated to the lab, to the ELO, a copy of the Techno Poetry Festival, the whole festival information, including the documentation work, the transcripts, It's all there, and then the Holu poetry that Eduardo Katz produced. So you guys are looking at space poetry next week in some of his work, so you're going to be there just a week early here. Richard Snyder wrote, and I'd love to hear about the saving issue that affected the process of composing. Do I understand correctly that you got used to rewriting the lost links?
Yes, you had to recreate everything. You understand, like, I have never worked at Word 5. That was it. I knew things about automating libraries, but very different kind of material. And I was sure I just had it wrong. There was 2 computers, 1 Mac, 1 PC, for all the people. There's about 15 people in the seminar to do their projects on. So we had to share out time, right? And so we were working around the clock, and you're trying to work fast, and you only had a certain amount of time, and you lose them while you have to remake them, And it was, I didn't realize the specificity. I only heard about Bill Bly in this latest thing in EBR, but I went to visit Brown a couple years after this, and I was like saying to them, well, I had this trouble with losing the links. They said, oh yeah, it's like it's a bug in the program. You lose them. You lose every 11th save. You lose your links. And I'm like, I can't believe you hadn't fixed this by now, right? Anyhow, yes, you had to do it all
like a glitch.
over. You start over, and only after a while do you realize that manically saving is not helping.
No.
It's like I would make a link and I'd save it, right? Just like
So you'd have to so the way to do that would be to make 10 different links and then close it down and then reopen it and start over again.
Which is burdensome.
So we have a question here in the lab. Will Lors, faculty here at CMDC program, asks a question.
Yes, you talked about the struggle with in Eastgate in the story space with maps, getting the maps. I mean, that was a feature added later, and it's obvious that maps and constellations are important to your work. Can you comment on the difference between a map and a constellation? It seems the constellation is patterns forced on something that might be random.
Well, to me, that's what Ice Age people did. They noticed that the star movement reproduced itself. And of course, depending on where you live, the south or north hemisphere or whatever, right? There was some kind of cultural agreement about ways to name these shapes, particularly around the North Star, and and they would map the pattern of the animal migration and temperature difference and so forth. I mean, it was an internet, but I mean, it was it was a way to track. It was a direct. But it was their creativity to map it in a certain way. They didn't make the star. There's the stars, and then there's the way you map the stars, which works for your cultural system. I don't know if the maps. I think story space maps were there from. I just showed you the tree map. There's an outline view. Every single one of them is grid-like, and rectilinear and whatever. And it works well for patchwork girls, say, because patchworks, they're not always actually all squares, but you know what I mean? It makes it, you can map that onto that very well. The kind of concepts I was interested in were just not, no. I mean, you just needed movement, you needed malleability, you needed
flow.
Yeah, you needed flow.
You need flow.
And so, I mean, believe me, there wasn't.
Does it also give the reader a kind of cognitive orientation to the material? I mean, a map that has a grid-like structure is a cognitive orientation. It's like any map, but this is,
Well, and not every map was like that either, right? Yeah. I mean, after from 1600 on more, Cartesian, after Descartes, in fact, right? Before that, we had dragons around the edges and everything, right? I mean, it's like there's all kinds of maps, right? Yeah, definitely. I feel it does. I feel you get a certain thing when you looked at that. I mean, it's quite phallic, the numbers graph,
Well, I was going to say, what you're trying to do is find women's language, and that's
and then there's a sort of breast and contour shape, which is also a DNA.
And it doesn't fit with these very angular structural.
No, it doesn't fit.
Cubes
and it doesn't. The women's body doesn't
Yeah.
fit, and so all this stuff. But then also there's this mythic kind of stuff. You know, this old woman and women on brooms and feathers and all this kind of stuff. So there's things that come from history and things that come from mythology and things that come from science and come from math. And I mean to give credence to all of them, but at 1997 and at this moment, there's much more societal credence to scientific and mathematical language than there is to myth and history, though at the point of the invention of writing, the reverse was the case, right? So they need to come together. I think, to me, they needed to come together, which was what could happen. You make a different loop, you choose on different things, and different things will clash up against each other, and it'll suggest something to you. But it should suggest, I think, both or many, you know, all these different perspectives need to be brought forward. And then I tried to do it in history, too, by focusing just on this Connecticut Valley group of people who were very creative.
So a question from Troy Rowden. How did composing a hypertext work affect how you thought about the direction of your work? In the absence of a specific linearity, for example, how did you know when you were done?
Well, I knew it was done because I was done when I had finished all the poems in the book, which is a linearity, right?
Yeah,
you know, I knew when I was done there. But as I say, the thing that delivered me to it was, which you would never think to write about this woman, Simone Weil, and her life,
Right.
and all that, was this problem that women's lives and thought aren't tracked sufficiently,
Right.
except by people who are very angry at them or want to claim them exclusively. You know, oh, of course she's already Catholic. No, she's a socialist, and you know, whatever. They don't want to know the other half of the person's life. So it was that thing, thinking about how to do that in a book first, that sort of had, and then the orality thing just blew me away because, but anyway, when I went on from this, I made pretty quickly more, well, not exactly Flash projects in Flash and Director, which gave me much more ability to draw and use images and use hover, and which hover in itself is a choice. A pre-scene choice. It's not like, oh, let's click and get there. Well, now I'm there. And then Slipping Glimpse, which is used as these really great videos that Paul Ryan took of Atlantic Ocean patterns, you know. So I was led on to do the things that I would want to do. Just the limitations of the software make you want to do something that with those limitations are at least partially broken.
Yeah.
And so there was, and those two projects were quite ambitious, and you know, so it took a while to do. And then, I mean, with Veniverse, there's like 6 different forms of it in terms of books and this and that. And the latest is iPad thing where you can draw your own constellations. Finally, the reader can draw the constellations.
So we have collected all of Stephanie's work in the lab. So we have everything, I think pretty much everything you've done. And we have also all your books, your poetry books.
There's another thing coming out this year, though, called Ringing the Changes, which is for Nix's Using Electricity series.
Yeah.
So it's computer generated. It's based on bell ringing, in like in England, in the church towers kind of thing, and which is a very incredibly mathematically complex. It's set theory. It be carried out by drunken.
Changes ringing?
Yeah, changes ringing, right? But begun by guys who are like just. If you make a mistake in doing the pattern, you have to buy the other guy's drinks and things. I mean, these are not scholars that are starting this stuff up, you know. But what is it then? It's completely embodied. They know it becomes a muscular knowledge. And so it's again a combination of very abstract knowledge to very embodied knowledge. And so we had a pattern called scientific triples. There's a lot of these different ones. And anyway, I have a book based on.
Good. Love to see that. It's coming out like
September
can we drop
or something.
Yeah. I was going to mention Monica Gorska-Olasinka says the most exciting aspect of reading literature is analyzing the way it's constructed. Thank you, Stephanie, for sharing this with us, all the details with us. So she's shaking her head yes. So other questions from folks?
I'm curious, given the many different versions and the types of writing you've now explored with, you have the print and the hypertext and even explored the web spaces, do you have a favorite that you prefer to write in or that you think works for this particular story best?
For this version, I honestly don't think I think they needed each other. I mean, I don't think I wouldn't have been able to start with the hypertext or the web piece, but I feel that it amplifies the print text in a significant way, and I don't think that we should be forced to choose one modality, and I don't think in today's world that makes any sense whatsoever. I do very much resent or mourn the lack of support for things like Flash and Director and so on, which allowed people to do very beautiful things in a very reasonable way. And yeah, I understand the security issues and la, 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 la. So fix those up, people, you great coders, instead of tearing down, So I do think, I mean, there's a lot of closing down on it. So, you have Twine. Now, Twine is fine, but Twine is a very limited thing compared to Slipping Glimpse or something like that, right? And the number of things that you can implement that way. And if you want people to think about things in a more complicated way, in a less simplified way, in a less partisan way, then you shouldn't be closing down modalities that invite a more complex engagement. And print is a modality that invites a complex engagement and learning to listen over a long time. I mean, you guys are forced to sit here, but most people will not listen to someone read for 15 minutes. You don't do it anymore. I love radio. I think radio is my favorite modality because I can listen with varying degrees and I can do something else at the same time, and I can either be completely focused on what I'm hearing or diversify my focus, I also have this problem with my hands and my shoulder, and just physicality of what's required. And I don't like having my peripheral vision cramped down to mobile devices and things. I don't like things that constrict either my muscular ability or my cognitive ability. And I think that modes of media are beautifully positioned to expand those, but in fact have not been designed to those ends at this moment. Exactly. You've got, and more commercial, and more commodified, and more to just a very limited set of rules or things that are going to work in the games or work in the shopping or whatever it is, right? So it's like this huge potentiality that was really, I think Tim Berners-Lee feels the same way. I mean, I think anybody.
Probably Tim Nelson, too.
Yeah, right. Everyone was there at the beginning. I mean, and there was a little teeny idyllic period where people really did share everything and could do everything. And the way things were designed at that time were so visionary, able for the reader and the writer. It was much more of a co-creating thing, right? Kind of mourns that this is, I mean, maybe you should have been able to see it ahead of time. But I mean, within seconds, most of the stuff on the net was porn. Or, or the moves and things were overtaken by predators and things. I mean, these spaces that were like utopic were very soon not.
But before that, when we were playing in moves and things were on the net instead of the web, it was a different world.
Yeah.
And this is, I think, part of the project that we're doing in the lab is trying to recapture or retain that so that people understand the time before the web, because there was a real distinct sensibility and purpose. Well, I keep talking about the dancing hamsters, but I mean this distinct purpose, this utopian. It was a very different world that was lost very quickly when the web was.
It was more like it's like a 3D library or something. Everything you go to a library for, to learn or share or find out something, you could do that faster in contact with more experts or more, just whether it was knowledge or sociality or what. It was just, it was an enhancement, of life. And it wasn't, I mean, just so much has changed, right? I mean,
not the good old days. We're not being nostalgic here, but there was
No.
a difference, and I think that's important to remember that, and so that we can maybe we can move that direction, because it was a really positive use of technology and tools.
Yeah. I mean, I would never, do not use story space. I'm not nostalgic for story space as an environment, right?
We're cutting this out of the video.
but the now you could do so much. The tools are there to do zillions of things more, but zillions of things more are not what's being done.
Go ahead.
I wonder if some of that isn't a balance, that in order to get democratic participation, the barriers to entry have been lowered. To do the sorts of things that we're nostalgizing right now, which are wonderful, require that you know how to at least compose in HTML or to compose in stories.
No, you could go and enter a Moo and stuff like that. You didn't have to compose. I mean, there was ways to take part and share in the experiences that didn't require that you were a creator. I mean, you could learn to become a creator. I mean, you have to know a lot of stuff now to really, also, they weren't upgrading the damn software every 3 seconds, right? So that if you did learn it, now you'd be sure not to know it tomorrow, right? Which is, these just general things, because it's a competitive thing. It's like beta, VHR and VHS. I mean, it's like things are not being optimized for social good. And I don't think there's any barrier. I mean, what's happening on Twitter or whatever, I mean, to say that democratic is one thing, and another thing to say that what does this mean? It's not like going and speaking in a public park in London, to try and rally your fellow things. And I don't think we just haven't figured it out yet. And the people who are living it are going to have to figure it out, right? Because they understand the components of it better. But better civic goals could be met.
We're talking ethics here, There's a real dearth of that right now in the country, I think. We have time for another question. Does anyone else want to ask one here in the lab or online? We still have 13 people watching. Thank you, everybody, for coming today. That's heartening to see that. And so many graduate students, in my class, which is wonderful. Any other questions? If not, I have one, I guess. Okay. So your interest is such a I know your work. It's such a variety of interests, but you have a definite focus in the scientific aspect, and the literary, and the way you try to bring those together. So do you want to talk a little bit about how you got to your interest in science and how you're pulling it together and connecting it with the literary humanities aspect of creation?
Well, my father was an engineer, and we lived in Detroit. And at that time, people built their own cars. They built their own house. They wired their own house. They did plumbing. I was just accustomed to seeing people do things, and sailed boats on the lake, and built their equipment. And it was that was physics, but it was physics at play. It was physics being used. So it wasn't going and studying in a book. It was, and we also lived. The next place I lived was Chicago, and I wanted to be an architect. There's a point at which I wanted to be an architect, which I think is very much a combination of, science and art or space or something. And it's a structuring thing. And how to make, I love to see Frank Lloyd Wright, the waterfall, the thing. It's like I saw that when I was like 10, and I'm like, yes, I want a waterfall in my house. So I think those are, and I loved math, and I was I majored in math for a while until, well, I won't go into whatever. That wasn't allowed in the graduate math library, and I wasn't, it was like a situation of women at the time in higher education. And, but on the other hand, my grandmother was reading me all these stories and telling me all these folkloric stories, and I never not had stories and poems and things in my life, and I loved that too. And I didn't see why they were so different. They didn't seem different to me.
Yeah.
They seemed beautiful to me.
Did you play musical instrument?
No, but my brother and my sister and my grandmother, a lot of people around me
did. That's how sometimes it gets connected, right?
Yeah, and I think maybe because they didn't do that. Well, I played piano for a while till I'm like, no, that's it. We're done. It's like Holly, like, done with this now. But I think it was they were equally beautiful. I don't know how else to say that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, if there's no more questions, we'll end the traversal. I want to let me before we end. I'd like to say a few thank yous. Normally, I start with the traversal with a welcome and all of that. I didn't this time because we have this very unique setup here on the table with the lampshade Macintosh and the PC, which we never show in the traversal. I'm sorry, this is probably time to do it. But I do want to thank the folks that have been helping us. This is the last traversal for the season. We've decided that we've done already 7, 8, and an interview, so we're going to put the others back to another time because I think we need to get the book out, the documentation book. All of these traversals we've done so far this year will go into the Rebooting Electronic Literature book, which will be published and released June 1st is the date we generally try to release these. And so that's what we're going to do is hunker down and get this work done. So the documentation has been important. So you're our second in this room, the last for the season, and we'll have probably 10 in that book this year because we have 3 left that we haven't put in from before. So, and I'll keep folks posted about that. I want to thank Greg Philbrook, who handles all the technical. Yeah, I mean, yay, Greg, for all the work he does in organizing this and doing all the tech support. I want to thank Nicholas Schiller. He's associate manager, associate director of the lab, and he's also a librarian here at school for working through and finding. He's helping me put together a system so that we don't have to have cameras on the computer. So I'm thinking next year we're going to have a very different setup for this in this wonderful room that David Alonzo, one of our faculty members, and John Barber built for us. So this is terrific. I want to thank the students that work in the lab, the rest of the L team. And here in the room today we have Holly Slocum, we have Andrew Nevu and Mariah Gwynn, but also Kathleen Zoller and Monica Roth. I want to thank Will Lewis, faculty from the program, who teaches web, video production. He's a wonderful artist, e-lit artist. He's also managing editor for EBR, a very important journal. And he's here today and asked one of the questions. So with that,
I would like to thank John Barber, who isn't here.
Yes, thank you.
Who set up all the sound stuff for us, and as I understand, consistently sets up the sound for these.
And normally he'll be here, but he had class. Yeah, we had a different
because
time.
I'm on a different day than you usually do it because I have to go to AWP and whatever.
Yeah. And also, just to mention this, the funding for a lot of what we do comes from various places, but some of it for this came from WSU, from the Buchanan Fellowship that I received last year. I'm at the end of that grant, so this is, this has been wonderful having the funding to support 2 students to help us with this work. We also have some funding from Electronic Literature Organization, from the Mellon Foundation, and I just submitted a grant to NEH yesterday, so keep your fingers crossed on that one for next year. Anyway, thank you everybody who came.
Thanks so
and
much.
Appreciate that, and thank you, Stephanie. Okay.
You done?
Yeah.